I'm very impressed that this group can go so late one evening and start so early the next morning. I was really tested last night. My turn to speak came last night after I usually am asleep in bed at home. So it was I hope I was coherent last night. I was not entirely awake, but I was certainly trying to be attentive. I guess I've concluded that Ukrainians, at least in North America, you must take very long naps after lunch. Kind of siesta kind of culture in Ukrainians in North America. Been able to burn the candle at both ends like this? I'd like to pick up to start with one thing that Oleh Rybachuk, his reference to civil society this morning and the strategic dialogue that Secretary Clinton has launched with civil society. The U.S. government has established over the last few years these kind of formal dialogues with governments around the world. It's probably about 35 or 40 different governments with which we've set up these agreements that we will meet on a regular basis, once a year, twice a year, and we have an agenda of agreed items that we will always talk about, and that's negotiated and agreed. And we have this, just to make it hard for those of us who work in the U.S. State Department, we have different names for all of them. They all have different acronyms. So we have a bilateral presidential commission with Russia, in which there's a civil society working group where I'm the co-chair with some Russian counterparts where we talk about rule of law issues and governance. In the case of Ukraine, we have a strategic partnership commission within which there is also a political dialogue and rule of law working group, where again I'm the American co-chair with Ukrainian counterparts, in which we've agreed, we've agreed to have these twice-a-year discussions about a whole range of things about rule of law and democracy, which includes all the things that we've been talking about this morning here, about human rights and media freedom and so on. In the case of the U.S.-Ukraine dialogue, it's interesting that this was created by the previous administrations in both countries and has endured through the change of administration in both countries, which I think is a good thing because it reflects the enduring nature of our engagement as nations with each other. And it also enables us to build on our predecessors' work. The reason that I'm mentioning this is to underscore what Oleh talked about, which is that in addition to this official government-to-government dialogue, what we've tried to do is incorporate a civil society component so that we as governments listen to what citizens groups, the business community, human rights groups, and others want to tell us. And our job as the Americans is to model for the Ukrainians that it's okay for ordinary citizens to tell their government what they think, and that we should incorporate that into our policy making. And so it's a growing evolutionary process, and I think the Ukrainian officials that we deal with are getting more comfortable with this. And we will continue to try to build this out going forward. As was mentioned in May, the next time we will meet in Kyiv, we'll try to build on this. I also wanted to mention that last night, I had prepared a longer, more formal statement for you all at this conference that the setting last night wasn't really appropriate for a formal address, but if anyone's interested, I can make it available to the conference organizers and also post it on the State Department website, and you can have access to that hopefully by close of business tomorrow on the State Department website. So just a more formal, fuller statement of U.S. policy towards Ukraine at this point. I'll do that. We have at the State Department a website called humanrights.gov, where a lot of these kinds of documents and remarks and so on are posted. So, for this morning's panel, I've been asked to be a discussant, which is to listen and react to our first few panelists, and I will do that now for a few moments. I want to say thank you to the panel and to you all for continuing my education about all things Ukrainian. I am learning with each presentation and each part of this discussion. Now, Professor Rybachuk spoke of the tension in contemporary Ukrainian society between those drawn to the West and those who feel more culturally comfortable with Russia and even with the Soviet heritage, and how this has given rise to conflicting notions of what rule of law means and where Ukraine's comfort zone is. I guess those are more my words than his. And I think this underscores this question that recurs about Ukraine's place in Europe and in the world, and where its connections are. And I also want to, part of this is a question of maturation. It's a question of a new state that's now 21 years old. 21 years is the age of an adult. But is it the age of a mature person, let alone a wise person? Now, when I was 21, of course, I thought I was fully mature and very wise. In the subsequent 3 decades, I've revisited that a few times. I'm less convinced each year that all wisdom resides in the young. But, so 21 is on the cusp. 21 is on the cusp of maturity, I would say at best. And I think we need to keep that in mind in all of our discussions about Ukraine these days. It is a new state, maybe an adult state, but is it a mature or wise state? Certainly the United States, 21 years into our independence, was none of those things. Our learning curve has been long and slow and painful. And I think we need to keep that in mind, not as a way to delay or postpone or weaken our commitment to its reform and its development, but as a reminder that these things can take time. And in that context, I would mention, this returns to Mr. Rybachuk's remarks, over these 21 years, public opinion surveys have shown us that Ukrainians' own sense of what Ukraine is and how they feel about Ukraine as a state has evolved. We know that from the opinion surveys. And in each year, and this is particularly and interestingly true among the Russian-speaking Ukrainians, their comfort with that flag and with being Ukrainians and thinking of themselves as Ukrainian citizens has grown in every year. It's a constant trend, and that's partly what happens over time. Younger people have grown up since the end of the Soviet Union and have a different way of looking at the world than many of us in this room who are older, who remember the Soviet Union, the way we think about it. So I think there's certainly hope in that, in the passage of time. And I think we need to think of the passage of time as one of our assets and our allies in the democratization of Ukraine. Halia Kornash provided some wise admonitions about the way that our engagement with Ukraine sometimes is presented through the Ukrainian media, and whether handshakes and meetings get fully explained to the Ukrainian public after we've gone. And I think that's important for us to be aware of as we wrestle with the complementary values of stern talk and engagement and how we find the right balance. But more importantly, I wanted to say how vital it is that she and so many others in Ukraine do what they do in doing the research, the activism, the advocacy that brings to light the very real problems, the human problems of individual cases and individual cases of miscarriage of justice in her part of the country and more generally. That is vital to us as governments because, as you know, we produce an annual report on the state of human rights in every country in the world, including Ukraine, including Canada, including all the others. And the work that she and others do feeds directly into that. We read those reports, we take them very seriously, and that's a part of how we know what's going on in Ukraine, and it feeds into our analysis. Dan Bilak spoke very wittily and with a certain cynicism born of his long experience in Ukraine. And it was a little bit about what I just mentioned, change versus non-change. Have things changed at all or enough in Ukraine over these 21 years? And he spoke, I think, particularly powerfully about the disconnect between society and government. It's a challenge for any democratic society, and it's even more acute in a place like Ukraine, which is a not quite consolidated democratic society. And I think it's important when he talked about the citizen as the building block of a modern democratic nation. The phrase I reiterated last night, government by the people, of the people, and for the people, that's really the very antithesis of the Soviet system that Ukraine is trying to shed itself of. And it's very important that we continue to focus on individual citizens and individual citizen initiatives. And so in conclusion, my overall observation that ties together all of these presentations and the larger discussion for this conference is that one of the brightest hopes for Ukraine's democratic future is the strength of its civil society. It is real, it is broad, it is deep, It is different than in some of its neighbors. It's certainly different than the case in Russia. The Kyiv Human Rights Protection Group is vital, as are other kinds of civil society organizations, not only including the churches, potentially, not only including the business community. And I want to conclude with a word to the business community, because the business community here in Canada and in the United States and in Ukraine are vital partners in this. And I think it's important that they be invited and challenged to step up and play the role of civic-minded citizens as they engage in commerce, because their prosperity as corporations in doing business or investing in Ukraine depends on the full emergence of true rule of law and an open society in which businesses, as others, can thrive. And the support of the business community for politically active civil society groups is going to be necessary if Ukraine is going to mature more fully as a democratic society. I know it may seem like it's a costly activity to support pesky activist groups when governments don't like their messages all the time, but that's one of the thresholds that will have to be crossed in order for Ukraine to fully move into the democratic camp, is for the business community, along with other aspects of civil society, to say that it's okay to disagree with government. It's okay to speak up for the rights of individuals, even unpopular individuals. And so I want to invite the different aspects of civil society represented in this room to come together and look for ways to support one another, because that's really the key to Ukraine's future. Thank you very much.